Okay.
Okay. Okay. Okay. Sorry, Colin.
Yeah.
Continue.
So yeah, so you can use that link that I provided in chat to see what other delivery organizations there might be that you could try to approach. But I'm pretty sure that EV Boost was the only one for Nova Scotia.
Mhm. Okay. Okay, folks, any questions for Colin?
If I might, can I start off by saying I really appreciate the fact that the Clean Foundation provided 2 cars for test driving at our synod last June. That worked out really well, and I think it gave you folks a lot of time to explain. But I'm just wondering if everybody feels really familiar enough with the Clean Foundation itself to be able to
Yeah.
to ask to have the conversation what you know the Clean Foundation does, what your roles and responsibilities are, and how it might apply to like we need the basics. Pretend we don't know anything. Although I have to tell you, Alan on the screen, who lives outside London, England, has been successful in installing EV charging stations in their parish parking lot. And so he spent an evening explaining some of the basics and some of his experience. But the more we can understand about the charging stations, like, yeah, pretend we don't know anything, Colin.
Sure. So yeah, Clean Foundation is an environmental nonprofit, and mostly we specialize in delivering government programs. So governments will have an idea for a program that they would like implemented, and then Clean Foundation will, act it out, take care of, all of the management and organization, staffing, and things like that. So yeah, Clean has been around for 30 years now. A lot of experience working in the environmental sector in Nova Scotia, and now also working in PEI. So yeah, we have a whole host of different programs. I'm just in the transportation team. So even within our transportation team, there's Next Ride for education engagement about electric vehicles. There's the Electrify rebate program. So the Nova Scotia provincial rebates on electric vehicles and e-bikes are processed by our department. And then we have several smaller programs for doing different research for things like rural transit and things like that. But Clean has a whole host of different things that are within like coasts, energy, reforestation, doing education programs in schools. Yeah, they're honestly they just announced that we have like another new program that's about to start rolling out with like another team of like 8 people. So yeah, there's lots going on in the environmental nonprofit sector. So yeah, in terms of charging, um, obviously like the largest barrier when it comes to installing chargers would be having power output. That's what you need to make sure that you have like your service basically. So I imagine like working with a lot of churches, a lot of your breaker boards, your service may be on the lower side, especially if you're working with any buildings that have oil heat. So of course, with oil heat, you're going to be not having a big electrical draw, so there wouldn't be a large electrical service hooked up. Most of these chargers, you're going to be looking at the same draw as a dryer or a stove. So anywhere between 30 and 50 amps. So a typical residential house would have maybe 100 amps of service if it had oil heating, and 200 amps of service if it has electric heating. So you're talking about a sizable amount, even for your average electrically wired home. So depending on your building, larger buildings would of course have much more service run into them, typically. But that would be your very, very first step, is finding out what level the service is, the electrical service is for your building, to assess whether or not you have capacity to put an EV charger in place. At least when you're talking about a level 2 charger. I probably should have started there with the levels of charging. So a level 2 charger is the most common kind of public charger. They're the ones that you see around in parking lots, at grocery stores or malls or the town halls and things like that. They'll take an electric vehicle of average range, charge it up completely from basically 0% in about 8 to 10 hours. So it'd be like an overnight charge for a full charge. But that's not how most public chargers are used. They're usually used, by the hour, 2 hours while somebody parks in a space and they're, doing something at that location or something nearby, so that way they can top up. So this is why you're starting to see more and more of those chargers popping up in parking lots everywhere, because when you have this like large network of slow-ish chargers, everybody can kind of like tap into having some electricity, and it makes it a lot easier for people who don't necessarily have like a home where they can install a charger themselves, can access reliable charging wherever they go. A level 1 charge is just out of a 15 amp wall socket. So you can actually charge an electric vehicle using any standard wall outlet. It is a very slow charge, but for the average vehicle, like you come home at supper time, you plug into your wall socket. By the time you get up the next morning, you're going to have about 100 to 150 kilometers of range added to the average EV. So it's a slow process to try to charge. It would take several days to fully charge a dead EV using one of those chargers. But the idea is, where it's so accessible, you would be using it, routinely to keep topping up the battery. And then, of course, with other chargers being available in your day-to-day run, you can grab more charge if it's just not available for you at home. Then level 3 chargers are the commercial level charger. Those are what you would use for a road trip mostly. Or let's say you had like a power outage at home and you didn't get to charge overnight. You could go to one of these level 3 chargers, and in 15 minutes, 30 minutes, depending on how much time you could put a sizable amount of charge into your vehicle. The program vehicle that I'm driving this week, if you hook it up to a sufficiently fast charger, it can actually put about 400 kilometers of range on in 15 minutes, which is basically getting very close to an equivalence to gasoline. So, very, very convenient with vehicles that are available now. Those chargers are incredibly expensive. Right now, you're really only seeing them being installed by very large organizations. Even then, usually with some sort of government subsidy. That's where EV Boost really came in. The idea behind the federal program was to be able to provide money for charging, but their project size was so large that most communities or organizations in rural areas wouldn't be able to access it. So that's why there are other delivery agents, because the federal government just has a much bigger scope that they have to deal with. But yeah, their main focus was actually on the level 3 chargers and providing funding for those, so that way they could have more of that outlay, because those are really the chargers that people look at the most, but wouldn't necessarily use the most. I've been an EV driver for 5 years now. I've put over 200,000 kilometers on my personal vehicles, driving fully electric. And the number of times on a personal vehicle that I've used a fast charger is like 4 times. Most of my charging I do at home. It's just, overnight and then drive away the next day. I'm very lucky, even to where I work at Clean Foundation, they do have electric car chargers available in their parking lot. So even if I was, stuck for a charge because something happened, I would still be able to charge while I'm at work. By the time a full work day is over, I have full charge back into my car if I needed it. So yeah, that's a little bit about like charging and what you're looking at there. So the level 3, that's like I said, that's well above what like pretty much any like non-corporation or government body could do. That requires like a lot of capital expense. So level 2 chargers though are much more approachable if you're wanting to offer something that's giving like a very good charge. Otherwise, you could really just offer exterior wall outlets to people to be able to use. And again, it would be the same as like running, just running like laptops or things like that. It's a slow charge. It would be a long charge over time. And most people aren't going to leave their car in one place for too long. That's even kind of the beauty when people say, like, do we need to charge money to be giving away this electricity for the charger? Or do we just give the power away for free? And you can get the occasional person who finds out, hey, like, this is a free charger and no one's really watching it, so they'll park their car there all overnight every night, and try to take advantage of that. But for the most part, people don't want to be very far from their car, so even the idea of a free charge isn't that great, because fully charging an EV completely is still only around $10 of electricity at Nova Scotia power rates. So you would have to leave your car in place somewhere for 8 to 10 hours to be able to like save $10 in electricity. It's not the same as like stealing someone's gas.
So this important sort of information that at least I hadn't thought of, because a number of reasons why churches might give their parking lots and what sort of locations would be advantageous. One of them was tourist areas, for example, where people are driving through, or people who are near highways. But in those cases, especially near highways, I'm guessing that people would want, we have an electric car too, I'm guessing that people would want level 3 chargers in those situations. Like, what's the difference in the installation cost? You say it's really, really expensive. What kind of numbers are you talking about?
Exponential. You could install a level 2 charger for less than $5,000, depending on how you did it. Whereas most of these level 3 commercial chargers, you're looking at a minimum of $250,000.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but by the time you've purchased the charger, that would also, like, it's such an incredible draw of electricity. Like when you think about like an electric vehicle battery, to kind of put it into perspective, an electric vehicle battery, a typical size right now is 60 kilowatt hours, and the average home uses about 15 kilowatt hours a day. So an EV has about 4 days of household use in its battery. So then when you fill that up, you are basically using 4 days of electricity for a house in less than an hour. So it's a huge draw all at once. So there's demand billing when you start making like that sudden of a draw, especially through the day. Utilities will bill you more. They'll start billing you, instead of being like small commercial or something like that, you can end up actually pushing yourself into like an industrial tier, which is something that people who have installed it haven't they didn't expect the demand charges. But yeah, it's incredibly expensive. I see Ray here has a question.
Yeah, hi Colin. So from what you're saying, it's not really possible to have a level 2 charger and to charge people for using it, is it?
It is. Oh yeah, it is absolutely possible. The expression I like to use is that for some people, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Basically, you can collect money, but of course, a charger that is going to collect money for you is going to bill you for the service, just like you would be billed for having an Interact, like like a business has, their debit machines. You would be having to pay for a subscription service to get that support, to have like a smart charger that could charge. And then you also have to start getting into, if you're collecting money, now you're now like closer to like a business instead of just being like a nonprofit or a charity or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, how different church organizations would be classified, but it could end up being a bit of a headache. I know even one of my friends, he owns a pizza restaurant and he has an electric vehicle, and he had looked at putting an electric vehicle charger that would bill onto his business. And even though he's already set up as a for-profit business, when he looked at trying to track out like all of the costs and things, he just said, you know what, it's easier for me to give the power away it's going to cost me less than I spend on napkins. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
If I might
It-
say, this is where Alan has a practical experience on this, and he might add to what you're having to say or what you're saying, Colin.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, what about from your perspective and your experience, Alan?
Yes, over in the UK, we've got the Type 2 chargers, and we've got two in our church car park, and we paid about £3,000. You'd have to work out what that is in Canadian.
About
But that,
6,000. So yeah, that's right around what we would pay.
yeah, but that's for two.
Mm.
That includes
That's pretty good.
installation. That includes installation of the three-phase power to the device and the network connection into the devices as well. So we've got two chargers for just over £3,000. So that's the cost, and I agree with you, Colin, that that type of charger is probably the ideal that we should be aiming for. The Type 1, you know, which is really domestic, where you could charge overnight, and I'm not too sure that that's really the sort of the thing that we should be looking towards. It's more a case of the Type 2, and on the Type 3, well, just forget it. You probably just don't have enough power in your building to actually support a Type 3 device. So that's the experience over here. And on the devices, we have it. We have an app. So you go to the device itself. It's got a QR code on each device, and then you dial in via the app, and you go via the company that actually manages the charger. The administrative costs, they take 10%, and they give you the 90% cost of what the customer is actually paying. It's not the money range is very, very similar to what you're talking about.
Perfect. That sounds like a very good setup. I haven't seen too much of that available here, but that also just speaks to how, Europe is like well ahead of North America in terms of putting out like good charging infrastructure that's easy to use. Here things are still, they are also like app based. But yeah, even just talking to some of the municipalities that have put in chargers that do bill, the cuts that those companies take, much more than the 10% that Alan's talking about. I could definitely see where scaling in Europe would allow for a smaller margin, and it's just a much more competitive space too. Right now, there aren't too many charging companies in North America that are running that sort of independent network. A lot of them are trying to like hold on to their own networks. It's a little more cutthroat, a little more capitalist. So yeah, I think that's why many groups end up going towards the not billing route, just because the companies I feel are a little more predatory because they can get away with it. So you could still shop around. I wouldn't be able to refer you to a company that I know of that has a similar setup to what Alan's talking about. I haven't heard of one yet, and I would love to, because I would absolutely pass that on. Even with EV Boost, most of what they were dealing with would be for apartment buildings and condos and things like that, and the chargers that they were buying and installing actually was all the same brand. It was quite funny, and they all have like pass cards that they would give to residents who could just tap in to activate the cars. So they were available to anybody in the building, but they weren't available to the public. So yeah, a lot of the charging, the stuff that we were seeing outside of like the mainstream installations that you see going into municipalities, a lot of those go with Flow or ChargePoint, but those are the more premium brands with like, excellent equipment, but it's very expensive equipment, and it's very expensive upkeep fees for running the software and processing the charges for you. So you could like that's where you have to like really weigh out the numbers when you're looking at your install, because here, like I said, you could do an installation like Alan's has done for about $5,000, with a couple of chargers, really like a couple of just very basic level 2 chargers, you could get for $400 to $600 each, and then you would just have to pay for your electrician. But those would be simple chargers where it's just plug and play, and the only way really to like turn them off or control them would be to flip the breaker. If you wanted to like turn it off at night or something like that, and only have it available through the day when somebody's on the property or something like that.
Okay,
very
Colin, I
simple
think
charging.
there's a question over here from Debbie, and I think there are a couple in chat. So maybe we could just stop for a
Oh.
minute to get those questions. Okay, Debbie?
No, my question was more along, and Alan already answered it, that I was
Oh, okay.
wondering if there were companies here that did the same thing as they apparently do in England, that will take care of the monitoring and the billing and so on, and for a 10%. But from what you're saying, Colin, yes, there are companies here that could do that, but they're going to charge a whole lot more than 10%.
Yeah, I commonly hear between 40 and 50%. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
As for the fee management companies considering offering nonprofit rates, I haven't heard of anything like that. But then also, like I said, we haven't dealt a whole lot with nonprofits installing. It is usually like like businesses installing public chargers, and so either they're doing it for free or they're doing it for profit. Trying to like just kind of land in the middle where it's just like we just want to recoup our costs, or at least have like a reasonable fee in place to prevent abuse. That one I don't know too much about, or like what the cut ends up being, because like there are some towns who just said like, you know what, we'll just charge $2 an hour, just like we charge for parking, and that'll be close enough for us in terms of recouping. Because again, a lot of the time they're getting some sort of subsidy dollars too, so they look at the amount of work that comes with trying to process those payments and saying, you know what, we'll give it away, or it'll be a nominal fee and we just won't even worry about what the fee is, and we'll send some money from the management company every once in a while that we can.
I think, Colin, there's a comment here from Hannah. Do you want me to read this, Hannah, or do you want to ask it yourself? Anyway, I'll read it. I wonder if the fee manager
already addressed that. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And there's a question from Ray, it looks like.
Yeah, okay, Colin. So what you're saying is a managing company would charge 40 to 50%, and then presumably you've got to pay for your own electricity. So your margin, if there is one, is between those two things. Whatever's left to that. Okay. And I'm just interested, Alan, from your point of view, if you've done this, you've done this in your church, or you've done it in other churches. Is that right in the UK?
Yeah, it's just in our church. We had this scheme that was available. This big fast railway going very, very close to where we live, and they had some sort of scheme which local neighbourhoods could actually claim on. So I spent about a year writing this claim, and I got some money to put these charges in. And we sort of greened up an old 1920 building, LEDs and hot water electrical heaters and electric car chargers, and just to smarten the place up. So we weren't there. It wasn't the prime purpose of the refurbishment. It's almost like a byproduct that just seemed like, this has to be the way to go. But the reason why Marion's actually drawn me in, because there aren't many other churches in our area that have done this at all. A lot of people are talking about it, but very well. I really don't know of any other churches that have done this at all.
Okay, and just then 2 other questions then, Alan. I mean, do you charge for it? Do you charge for the charge, if you like? And you do, yeah.
We do charge because they, as I say, they use the QR code on the side of the device, It's
Okay.
it's a wall-mounted device, and once they use the QR code, that actually goes into their like Apple Pay or whatever it is, and it pays the company that actually runs the scheme. They take off their management fee and they give us the 90% remainder.
And what sort of location are you? Are you in a town or a village
Yeah.
or?
In the middle of a town.
Okay. Thanks.
Anyone else have comment or question?
Yeah. The thing that I would suggest looking for, like if you're pricing this out, the way that I would evaluate it would be looking at, you know, how much electricity are you likely to be using, and like how much extra will it cost to have a charger that is capable of collecting a fee. So as I mentioned, like you could get like a very simple basic EV charger for like between 300, maybe even $600 for like a good weatherproof exterior rated charger. And then you're looking at an installation cost, which would vary greatly from setup to setup. It would be very dependent on the building, but you know, $1,000, you know, maybe $2,000 in total per charger. You could do it with a very simple charger. The ones that connect to networks here do cost quite a bit more. You know, they require Wi-Fi access or a cellular plan to be able to maintain the connection, to be able to like start charges and connect into the network. So you're looking at like that sort of, you know, making sure that you have that connection. Some of them won't take Wi-Fi. Some of them will require you to wire Ethernet into the back, which is like another installation cost. And then you are looking at like some of them will usually charge like a subscription fee plus a fee onto your like whatever you're grossing. So, or some of them will do like you pay a flat fee for a subscription, but you will pay no fees on your charges that people pay for because maybe you're not doing many getting many charging sessions. So they'll take a flat rate from you because that's better than taking 40 or 50% of your sales because your sales are low. So when you add up like those extra costs, like a more expensive charger, easily you would be looking at like $1,500 instead of like $500 to $600 for the you know the simpler charger. And again, like an hour of charging right now in Nova Scotia would cost about $1. So you would need to recoup a lot of money to be able to justify the extra expense of being able to collect money. That would be the thing that I would watch for. You would have to pay much more for a better charger to collect money, but that premium may not be worth it for what you actually end up collecting in the end, depending on how active your charger ends up being.
So as churches, we sort of, I think the idea behind those, or one of the ideas, was the outreach to the community in terms of supplying a service. So what you're talking about as this simple server, which would cost very minimal once it was in, but not charging anything and no connection to internet, is a possibility in terms of if that is the reason why the church wants to do this. So if you're talking about like $1 or a few dollars a week or something,
That's right.
that would be something for people to consider, I guess.
Yeah, it really does come down to trying to.
We have a couple of questions here. So Hannah and Sandra. So Hannah, you have something?
Yeah, sure. I'm with the Ecology Action Center, so I'm really just in listening mode and learning also. So it's great to meet you, Colin. And I was wondering, is there, in your experience, any advantage to a group or like a large purchase? So let's say that, 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 churches across the province decide they want to move forward with this. Would there be any advantage to them in purchasing in bulk? Maybe some cheaper level 2s for the churches that want to go with that. And it might be a way for some of them who want to go a bit more high end to be able to afford those if they can get bulk rates. So based on the work that you've done across the province with other organizations and businesses, has that happened? And do you think that's a possibility that they could take advantage of?
It's certainly a possibility. I would imagine that that is something that you could do. I haven't worked on a whole lot of projects of like that would hit that kind of scale. Would be the big thing. Mostly I've been working with, like I said, municipalities who are putting in like 1 charger, 2 chargers in the town, and then looking at expanding from there. You know, they're just piloting having charging and figuring out the best ways to do it. But when it comes to say like the apartment buildings or whatnot, like I know like some of those buildings were buying 16 chargers, which is a big outlay. That's a lot of electricity to be able to wire in and run simultaneously. I would imagine that like if you that would be something you would probably have to negotiate through like a supplier. You may even end up with like hiring an electric company who would who covers the entire province and then would like do that bulk buy for you from a supplier. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like a company that you could like make that inquiry to. Because I do know some supplier like Graybar. Graybar has been getting into doing supplies, but they only work with commercial customers. They don't really sell to individuals. It's usually just to to commercial electricians. But they're definitely gearing up to be able to like deal with that kind of purchase. So yeah, I haven't seen a whole lot of them. That is more on the EV Boost side thing. It is unfortunate that we don't have Julia to kind of speak to that. But I can say like one that I have seen a lot of are the Electric Avenue chargers. I'm not sure actually who supplies them, but I know when I was traveling with Julia to go and test out some of the installations, yeah, like almost every single one of the buildings we went to test had Electric Avenue chargers. So they're definitely something that like I said, that those ones did come with a way of controlling the charge. They were a smart charger. And they did require like the problem for some of them, they didn't actually have their internet connection hooked up, so they weren't operational. So we weren't able to test them. That's the kind of thing where it's just like that would hold up like the EV Boost process, because we can't certify that the chargers actually work, and that means we can't finish paying them until it works. So yeah, the Electric Avenue ones I've definitely seen large outlays of those, but I don't actually know myself who has been supplying them. It does seem unlikely that all of them would be getting installed by the same company. So someone out there is supplying these chargers, and supplying them in bulk. So yeah,
What about companies like what about Flow? I see that around a lot.
Flow is super popular. It's a Canadian company. They build excellent chargers. They're even like their basic home chargers though are quite expensive. They're well over $1,000. But they are very, very quality. I don't know that would be like going like Flow and ChargePoint are like your two most premium chargers. They would have the most features, the most durability. They are built for high use. Like you'll see them in places like IKEA's chargers that they have are ChargePoint chargers. Flow has been used. Well, Flow builds a lot of the level 3 chargers in Nova Scotia, but also their level 2s were installed at a bunch of Canada Post locations. They're very, very reliable. They're very easy to use, but they would be quite pricey. And the idea behind making an investment like that would be that they're in a high use area, and where you folks aren't really sure like how much uptake you would have. You're looking at it as more just like a public service. I would probably avoid going for those premium brands and just looking for a good, affordable, weather rated, simple charger to go that route.
I think Sandra has a question. been waiting.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm going to probably change a little bit the direction of the conversation, because I'm kind of curious about establishing the need in a particular area. And one of the reasons is because in order for me to get gasoline or anybody else to get gasoline, we all have to go somewhere and get gasoline. But many could do a lot of their charging at home. So is there a kind of sense of what the network of charger stations would look like? And, you know, the number of charging stations you would need in say a church parking lot or some, so that you would have some way of figuring out as a group whether you are doing your community a service if you do this. And I come from a rural area, so if you could speak specifically to how we go about doing that, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, I'm a rural liver myself. I'm in the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia, so yeah, and a lot of people thought that I was crazy when I got an electric car in 2019, and you know, they're like, "Oh, how are you going to be able to get around?" And it's like, the car can drive to Halifax and back again from my house twice without needing a charge. It'll be fine. I'll be okay. And yeah, you really like nailed the charging problem for everybody. Really, is like, who will end up using this and how much use will it get? This is why you see a lot of support programs for installing charging infrastructure, because there is no, for like corporations who are looking for profit, there is no sure way of knowing if people will use your charger or if it's going to get an uptake enough to compensate for the big cost. A lot of them, right now, there is no path to profit for these like high power charging stations, let alone like the lower powered ones. Now, the advantage to the lower powered ones is, of course, it is a much lower upfront cost. So that is why you see much more the level 2s. It's a lower capital cost and it's an easier path to figuring out like honestly, like when a company looks at it, like IKEA, for example, they put in 4 electric car chargers, you know, it's going to cost them $10,000. They're not looking at the price for it because it's such a small amount to them. They don't care if the customers end up using it or not, because it ends up not being much of an impact on the amount of money that they're working with. For a church group, it's a whole other equation. And you would have to look at, like, on the ones side of things with rural, especially, a lot of rural people have their own homes, so it's a lot easier for them to charge at home. They need to charge more because they're covering more distances, but most EVs these days have a 400-kilometer range, so you can stray quite far from home and then come back without really like pushing the limits of what your range can do. You have to really go on a road trip to be able to press it. So yeah, like what we're seeing right now is that, you know, somewhere around like 80 to 85% of all EV charging happens at home. But the number one barrier to people wanting to adopt an electric vehicle and take one of those on is that they feel that the charging infrastructure is insufficient. So when you also look at like where this is really going, like right now, we've seen studies that show that somewhere around 90% of EV owners are homeowners as opposed to renters, but most Canadians don't own their home. So most Canadians aren't adopting EVs in the same pattern that early adopters have been doing, because the early adopters are the people like me. I have a house. It was very easy for me to install my charger. So I was able to do it, you know, no headache, very easy, very convenient. For people who are, you know, like they live in an apartment building or a condo, or, you know, like they don't own the property that they live on. So maybe they live in a house, but they're renting that house and their landlord will install a charger or something like that. They have fewer options, and that's where the public charging does become important. So for the rural areas, it may actually be easier for most EV drivers, at least at this stage of the game. Most of them would likely have access to charging at home through a wall outlet or through a charger they can install themselves. It's the urban areas that the demand is highest, because that's where you have, a much higher density of people living in space and having fewer access points, because their home setup just doesn't allow for them to charge at home.
So Colin, this is, I mean, we talked about this a little bit, about energy poverty, not at this meeting, but one of the reasons why the city of Halifax, for example, talked about the necessity for public charging and so on, had to do with energy poverty. And mostly they're talking about old apartment buildings in particular, where I live in a condo, we have an electric car, we were able to install a charger because the condos were built fairly recently, and the meters were all on the floor with the garage, so it wasn't still expensive, much more expensive than putting it in a home, because you have to pay to get the meter connected to the charger in your garage, etc. So, but there are also, the low, many people who have very low use of electricity, for example, don't have driveways to their place, live in apartments, all those sorts of things. Do you have any experience in dealing with some of those, say in the programs you did in some of those apartment buildings? Were any of them serviced? Or, there are churches too that are in these poor areas. We talked about this at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah, the energy side of things, that is getting like a little outside of my scope for like what my programs do, at least at this point. But yeah, speaking to like energy poverty, that is like the really tricky part about an electric vehicle is of course that it's a very large upfront cost, but then it dramatically reduces like the actual cost of owning a vehicle. Very cheap to maintain, very reliable in that way too, where like for my EV, I drive 35,000 kilometers a year because I'm a commuter, and I have to spend about $100 on maintenance a year, compared to somebody trying to drive a gas car around, and they're having to do $70-$80 oil changes every few months. I just did a presentation to a group of high school students, and they were talking about the costs of things, and we discussed how even looking at you buy like a $200 pair of boots, and that $200 pair of boots will last you 10 years or more, but if you don't have $200, you're going to end up spending $30 for a pair of boots every year, and you're going to end up spending more than the $200 over that 10 years. So being able to give people access to things, the charging, if someone has access to an electric vehicle at this point, they're probably doing well enough to be able to they're not being driven down by energy costs.
Right.
But that will be something as we move forward that will become a bigger and bigger issue as it gets harder and harder to get gasoline vehicles. The zero emission vehicle mandate does stipulate no new gasoline cars. They're not going to be taking gasoline cars off of the road, but over time, yeah, there's definitely going to be more people getting like pushed to the side, where it's like all they can get is an electric vehicle, and as you're saying, like they have no access to any charging. They don't have an accommodating landlord, and this is where like those public spaces will be really kicking in. But at this point, a lot of it comes down to convenience. But even with like the rebate program, for example, sometimes we will get a criticism that the rebate program is misplaced because it's just helping people buy expensive cars. But as we're seeing, we're getting cars cycling now. At this point, some of the first EVs have been through a 10-year life cycle and retire. So now I see so many of the first generation Nissan Leafs around. They only have 100 kilometers of range. They're nothing fancy, but you can get them for a very similar price to a lot of other used cars these days, and take advantage of the low energy cost and take advantage of the low maintenance cost. Things like the Chevrolet Bolt, was quite expensive when it first came out, and now those prices are coming down and down as more and more EVs are getting into the market. It is getting more and more approachable for people to be able to like take that leap where they might say, you know what, I want that $200 pair of boots. I can make that work so I can get that advantage. And then we have to make sure that we have that charging infrastructure in place so that people who are ready to take that first jump. In 2019, I was working as a driving instructor, so my electric car was it was an easy choice for me, because I was driving in the most inefficient ways possible. I'm in heavy traffic all the time, trying to teach new drivers how to handle that safely. So all the energy savings from that made up for the extra cost, and I was driving 50,000 kilometers a year. So huge savings. I was able to take that leap at that point. EV prices have kind of stayed the same. There's a lot of luxury EVs at this point that this is why you're seeing a lot of slowing in the sales. Basically, they've just focused on too many luxury vehicles. EVs keep going upscale when really we need more of those affordable ones. But the used market is really interesting, especially here in Nova Scotia. We're starting to see more and more affordable EVs and getting more and more people, like I said, taking that push where it's just like, you know, they couldn't buy a brand new Bolt, but a 4-year-old or 5-year-old Bolt, they can say, you know what, that's $20,000. The money that I will save on gas, I can do that instead of spending $20,000 on that 5-year-old Civic. So, you know, we're in that like kind of second phase where we're moving past the early adopters. You know, the cars that they've had and retired are now getting into the hands of like the next step down. And it's only going to be like another 5 years before we start seeing like the third owners of those EVs, where EVs will be really like quite more affordable for most people. So, yeah.
Good. Thanks a lot, Colin. Alan, would you like to add anything to that? Do you have any insights?
Well,
I mean, I'm not putting you on the spot, just if you want to.
no, it's really coming. You know, we've been round and round. You know, whether we do this as an individual group, individual churches, I think that's a real slog. I think if each of us tries to learn all about electric car chargers, type 1, 2, 3, network connections, routers, 3-phase supplies, you know, it's going to drive you mad. So the idea that I came up with after I got out the shower was to try to find some friendly EV supplier that maybe you could find out who the willing parties were within your church groups in the area, and take a proposal to somebody like Flow or one of the other EV suppliers. But alternatively, if the major suppliers aren't interested, because we're probably small beer compared with the market they're probably interested in, you know, are there friendly electricians that have actually done this before, and just take one down the pub one day and talk about the opportunity of maybe a dozen churches with wanting to have 2 or 3 chargers in each of their car parks, and see what ideas they come up with. But do it on your own.
Very good idea.
I think you do it on your own, you'll die.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, I don't think anybody is seriously thinking of doing it on their own, but maybe there are some. But yes, you made that suggestion once before, and I think it's a really good one. Any other comments or anything, questions for Colin or for Alan at this point?
I might.
Yeah.
So
Mary?
yeah, and Alan, you know, you've got a point there. Really, tonight's been an important night for me because it's made me realize even more so how much I don't understand, or how more complex it is. I knew that it wasn't that easy, but Colin, we're doing this because of outreach, not just to be self-serving for our members, but to serve the community. 2 things: to serve the community and to live out our commitment to caring for the planet, because churches have already committed to this. And so we want to find ways of doing it that are innovative, constructive, and helpful. And so we thought, okay, this makes sense, especially given the government's commitment to, having all new electric vehicles by 2035, needing 400 and some odd thousand EV charging stations across the country. I thought, well, we probably have 400,000 church or faith community parking lots if you take in, all the other religions. And those parking lots aren't being used a lot. They're often empty. Although I think of something like the church in Dartmouth North, the Anglican Church in Dartmouth North, where it's right across from a school and it's always full, and teachers are always parking their cars there. So for them to have an EV charging station there during the day would be incredible. Even though there's not a high traffic flow around the building, but there is, at twice a day, in the morning and in the afternoon. And there's probably other parishes that are like that. But we took, we're trying to figure out how the best way is to approach this, because one of the first things that we did was we wrote a letter to every municipality asking them if they would like to use our land. Just if they'd like to use the land for the installation of charging stations. And that in the HRM apparently is quite an attractive proposition, and they responded enthusiastically. But the wheels of government move slow. And so we have to follow up with them, because apparently the feds, have dropped almost $1 million into the HRM for this. So what's the latest on that? Do you know?
So I haven't gotten too many details on that. My manager was actually at that announcement. She got invited to it, but HRM's actually been kind of mum on the implementation of that money. My understanding is that most of it is actually for the bigger level 3 chargers. HRM is installing their own network of 18 fast chargers. Because basically when most of Nova Scotia's fast charging network as it stands now was built, it was built to radiate out from Halifax. So there's not really much fast charging infrastructure inside Halifax. So if you're leaving Halifax, great. But if you're driving in, it's much harder to get back out again. So kind of funny enough, basically, the province ended up subsidizing chargers for people from Halifax to use, and Halifax is now making chargers for people coming from the rest of the province to use in Halifax. Which is just like, again, like you were saying, like some of this can be like quite complicated when you look at how people actually use the chargers. Who are you serving? So yeah, I know HRM would definitely be keen to take advantage of that sort of offer. I'm kind of surprised that they haven't. Maybe there may be something for them in terms of like trying to subsidize more charging, especially if Enercan is starting to back off of like the level 2 charging and focusing more on the flashier level 3 chargers. But in terms of trying to like achieve your goals, like I don't want to like scare anybody away from installing more electric vehicle chargers. That's absolutely like the greatest thing for my program to hear, that somebody wants to support that. Making sure that you are getting the most value for the effort and the money that your organization would be putting into it would be like my primary concern. Making sure that like that if you install these, that you end up satisfied with what you've done. And unfortunately, like I don't have a whole lot of like firm data that I could give to you to say like this is what you would see in a rural area, or this is what you would see in this part of Nova Scotia, this is what you would see in Halifax for usage, because it is just very, very erratic. But I will say like the biggest thing about electric vehicle chargers and how common they are, it does have a very big effect on people's perception of whether or not they can go electric. So even if you were to go to the expense of putting in an electric vehicle charger and it only gets used a couple of times a month, just seeing people hooked up to an electric vehicle charger or seeing an electric vehicle charger being available is a statement in and of itself that makes people feel much more comfortable about the idea of going with an electric vehicle. Like I said, with me driving 200,000 kilometers, very rarely have I needed to use public charging. I can do it from my home with not much planning involved at all. And that would be true for most Nova Scotians. The average Nova Scotian drives fewer than 40 kilometers in a single day. Like that's an hour of charging on one of these level 2 chargers that we're talking about. So that's a couple of hours plugged into a wall outlet. So the need isn't so much that like people are being stranded around the province because they don't have access to chargers. There was actually I do have that that statistic right there. CAA looking at their electric vehicle calls. Of their calls that were related to an electric vehicle, only about 2% of them were for people who had run out of charge while they were driving the vehicle. Most of them were for flat tires, broken suspension, just like it all lined up with the same sort of thing that the gasoline cars would have. And it's about 2% of their calls for gas is because people ran out of gas trying to go somewhere. So it actually matches up very neatly, electric vehicle to gas use, at least to the calls for CAA. So yeah, people aren't running out of charge, but that perception is very important. So in terms of like looking at it as a contribution to the community, trying to display leadership, you would definitely be able to achieve that goal by installing chargers. The practical part of it, like how many chargers would you be providing to people? That's a much harder thing for me to answer. And
I think Judith has a question.
You mentioned support earlier and then referred to the government with the federal money. Are there incentives like there are for heat pumps, et cetera, for people to put in chargers in their homes or to have a community charger? Are there any of those?
Not in Nova Scotia currently. No incentives, and like the program that we were hoping to speak to you about tonight, EV Boost. Like I said, just today we found out isn't getting any more funding. So the amount of money that we've already earmarked, that's getting spent, and then the fund isn't getting topped up again currently. It does feel like they're moving towards, like I said, the bigger chargers and bigger investments, whole networks for counties or provinces. So yeah, so unfortunately at this point there isn't anything. That's not to say that in the next 6 months we can't like try to put something together. That's just speculation on my part. I imagine someone will want to kind of step in and fill that void if it exists for too long, because as I said, like the level 2 chargers are quite important, especially from maybe not so much from the practical standpoint, but even just from that idea of like chargers are common, chargers are available. Oh yeah, I could just drive around with an electric car. Look, I could charge, like this church is like just a little walk down from my workplace. I could charge there and then grab my car at lunch, and that would keep my battery topped up. Or they drive, like I said, they go to IKEA and they see chargers there, and then they drive to the theater and there's chargers there, and it creates that sense of like this is widely adopted, especially where electric cars don't really draw a lot of attention in and of themselves. I know I'm always surprised as I drive around, I get to spot all the electric cars because I know what they look like. I know what every one of them is. A lot of them are very sneaky. You wouldn't necessarily know them at first blush, because a lot of them, the only difference between them and their gas equivalent is that they don't have grill. It's all filled in. But even then, a lot of that they hide with different decorative techniques. So it looks very similar to the gas model. But I see their charging port outlines, or recognize it, and so there are more and more of those EVs out there, but it's not as visible to the average person. So when they start thinking like, well, is there anything there? Are people buying these cars? Are there any chargers anywhere? As people start seeing this, they start to accept that, like, yeah, this is a thing that's happening. We're almost to the point of like 10% of all vehicle sales being electric. So that's all the new sales, I should say. So 1 in 10 cars that are being sold brand new now are electric, and that just keeps going up. So there are more and more of those cars out there, but less visible than people might think.
Thank you.
I think, were there other people with questions? I think we're over time, but if there's a question, Judith, you still have your hand up. Did you want to say
I
something
know I'm
else?
gonna have to put it down. It's the first time I've ever put my hand up in a Zoom.
Okay, so we're just gonna leave it there.
Just ignore
Okay,
me.
well, thank you very much, Colin. That was
Pleasure.
very, useful information. Thank you for being here and answering questions. And thank you to everybody else who came. And, we'll have some message follow-up from this and see what next moves will be. And you'll be hearing from us. So thanks very much. And thanks, Hannah, for coming along too. And
My pleasure.
yeah, great. And Alan, of course, who should be in bed. Okay. Thank
And
you
now
all very
Alan's
much.
just part of the team, isn't he?
Yes, he is just part of the team. We've adopted him, or he's adopted us. I don't know which it is. Okay. So, yes, thanks, everybody.
Thank
Marion.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
For having me,
Bye-bye.
and good luck with your project. Please feel free to reach out. You have our contact. Transportation
Right.
will, like I said, EV Boost
We
is
will.
retired, but transportation continues on. We have lots of things happening. So
Definitely.
We'll be in touch.
awesome.
Okay.
Take care,
Thanks.
folks.
Bye.
Bye.